In the heart of the South Wales valleys, nestled in the narrow embrace of the mountains that gave it its lifeblood, lay the village of Aberfan. Like countless communities of its time, its very existence was dictated by a single industry: coal. The black seams running deep beneath the earth were the source of employment, identity, and a rugged, close-knit community spirit forged in shared hardship and labour. Towering above the village, however, were the silent man-made mountains born from that industry, the colossal spoil tips. 7 of them loomed over Aberfan, vast pyramids of discarded coal waste, shale and slurry excavated from the Merthyr Vale colliery. For generations, they were a constant accepted feature of the landscape, a dark, brooding backdrop to daily life that children played on and adults largely ignored. This precarious balance between the community and the byproducts of its labour was shattered with terrifying finality on the morning of October 21st, 1966. What had been a symbol of industry became an agent of annihilation. At approximately 9:15 a.m, a huge section of spoil tip number 7, critically oversaturated and unstable, broke free. It transformed in seconds into a 40-foot-high avalanche of black sludge, a semi-liquid mass of over 140,000 cubic yards, moving with the speed of a train. It descended upon the unsuspecting village below. Its primary target, the Pantglas Junior School. In the space of a few horrifying minutes, this place of learning and childhood innocence was engulfed, claiming the lives of 116 children and 28 adults in one of the most soul-crushing and criminally preventable disasters in British history. The genesis of the disaster was not a sudden, unpredictable act of nature, but a tragedy built slowly, over years, from a foundation of systemic negligence and colossal ignorance. The mechanism of the collapse was terrifyingly simple. Tip number 7 had been started in 1958. Critically, it was built directly on top of porous sandstone that concealed underground springs and watercourses, a fact known to the local population. For 8 years, the National Coal Board, the state-run entity that controlled the mines, had been dumping waste onto this fundamentally unsuitable ground. The springs continuously seeped into the core of the tip, slowly saturating the fine coal waste, or tailings, until it achieved the consistency of a dense, unstable quicksand. Heavy rainfall in the days and weeks preceding the disaster was the final fatal catalyst, adding the last measure of water needed to liquefy the immense pile and send it sliding. The truly disturbing element of Aberfan is that this catastrophe was not only foreseeable, but explicitly and repeatedly forewarned. The NCB had been formally alerted to the danger on multiple occasions. In 1963, a significant slide on Tip 7 had occurred, causing alarm among residents of the houses below it. That same year, the borough engineer for Merthyr Tydfil, D.C.W. Jones, wrote letters to the NCB expressing grave concerns about its placement over known springs and the potential for a catastrophic flow slide. His warnings were dismissed with bureaucratic indifference. Even the children had expressed fears. A young student, Errol Mai Jones, had told her mother just 2 days before the disaster of a dream she'd had. "I dreamt I went to school, and there was no school there. Something black had come down all over it." She was among the children who perished. The NCB's internal culture was one of arrogance and dismissiveness. Tip management was seen as an unskilled, menial task, not a matter of complex civil engineering. Their singular focus was on extracting coal, and the safety of the people living in the shadow of their waste was a tragically low priority. On that foggy Friday morning, the 240 children at Pantglas Junior School were settling into their classrooms for the last lesson before the half-term holiday. Many had just returned from the morning assembly, where they had sung the hymn, "All Things Bright and Beautiful." A thick mist hung over the valley, obscuring the tops of the spoil tips from view. On the tip above, a small group of workers noticed the ground sink by several feet. They knew instantly what it meant. They ran for their lives as the vast structure began to move, a section the size of 2 football fields, detaching with a deep, guttural roar that survivors would later compare to a low-flying jet or a continuous roll of thunder. The sound was so immense it was heard for miles, yet in the village directly below, the noise of the school may have masked it until the final terrible seconds. The avalanche moved at an incredible speed, estimated at over 80 miles per hour at its peak. It first obliterated a farmhouse in its path, killing everyone inside. It then surged across a canal and a disused railway embankment before slamming into the village itself. It engulfed 2 terraced houses on Moy Road before its main force crashed into the back of the stone-built junior school. The school clock was later found stopped at 9:13 a.m. The force of the impact was unimaginable, smashing through thick stone walls and plate glass windows as if they were paper. Entire classrooms on the building's north side were instantly filled, floor to ceiling, with a suffocating tide of rock, water and mud, in some places 30 feet deep. The immediate aftermath was one of eerie, unnatural silence, followed by the dawning, unbearable horror of what had occurred. The first on the scene were the miners themselves, who, hearing the roar, instinctively ran from the colliery towards the village, their lamps still on their helmets. They were met with an apocalyptic sight, a river of black sludge where homes and a school had once stood. They were soon joined by the entire village, mothers, fathers and neighbours, who began a frantic, desperate rescue effort. They dug with shovels, pickaxes, and often with their bare, bleeding hands into the dense, unyielding slurry, which was already beginning to set like concrete. The miners' skills honed for working in hard rock were tragically ill-suited for this terrible new substance. In the first hour, a few children were pulled out alive from the wreckage, but soon the grim reality set in. The rescue operation became a recovery mission. Hope turned to the recovery of bodies. A teacher, David Bainan, was found dead, his arms wrapped around 5 children in a final, futile act of protection. The human toll was catastrophic. 144 people were killed. Of the dead, 116 were children, mostly between the ages of 7 and 10. An entire generation was virtually wiped out. In the days that followed, the village's Bethania Chapel became a makeshift mortuary, and a procession of parents had to perform the unthinkably grim task of identifying the small bodies of their sons and daughters. The subsequent Tribunal of Inquiry, chaired by the eminent Lord Justice Edmund Davies, was a meticulous and scathing investigation. The NCB's chairman, Lord Robbins, had initially told the media the slide was caused by natural, unknown springs, a blatant attempt to frame it as an unforeseeable natural event. He arrived in Aberfan a day late, having chosen to attend his investiture as a university chancellor first. The tribunal systematically dismantled the NCB's claims, forcing Lord Robbins to eventually concede the organisation's fault. Its final report was unequivocal, stating with brutal clarity, "Blame for the disaster rests on the National Coal Board. This is a terrifying tale of bungling ineptitude by men charged with tasks for which they were totally unfitted, a failure to heed clear warnings, and a total absence of tipping policy." In a final, cruel insult that compounded the tragedy, a bitter dispute arose over the cost of removing the 6 remaining dangerous tips that still loomed over Aberfan. The NCB, the very body found wholly responsible, offered a pittance and then flatly refused to cover the full expense. In an act of profound institutional callousness, the Labour government of the day, with the backing of the Charity Commission, decided to take £150,000 from the Aberfan Disaster Fund, a fund that had received over £1.7 million in donations from a horrified and sympathetic public, to help pay for the clean-up. It was an appalling decision that forced the bereaved to pay for the removal of the hazard that had destroyed their families. This second disaster remains a source of deep and justifiable anger, and though the money was finally repaid by a new government in 1997, it could not erase the memory of the betrayal. The Aberfan disaster was a watershed moment that forced a fundamental change in legislation governing mines and quarries. But its legacy is more than just a footnote in legal history. It stands as a chilling monument to the human cost of corporate and governmental negligence. It is a profoundly disturbing testament to how institutional arrogance, bureaucratic inertia, and a callous disregard for human life can converge to create a disaster of almost unimaginable sorrow, leaving a permanent scar on the heart of a nation and a void in a community that can never be filled.